Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Mind of Sai Marie, your corner of the internet where your brain gets a little stretch, your assumptions get a little challenge, and your sense of humor gets a solid workout. I'm your host, Sai Marie, here to poke and prod and sometimes punch your perspective gently. Okay, maybe not so gently. But anyway, tonight we are diving into a couple of different topics, and be sure that the absurd, ridiculous, and outright idiotic will probably come up. But don't worry, we're going to be, real. And while some people don't need critics, they probably need a mirror. And the type of mirror that cracks just a little when they look into it so that they can finally see the chaos behind their falsified wall of confidence, or perhaps that's egotisticalism. Who knows? In any case, you gotta look at those people like they think they know everything, and these are the same kind of people who will put a do not push button in front of them and the whole control panel, and just like Homer Simpson, they're gonna lean in and press that big red button just to see what could happen. And somehow, those same people think they're qualified to make decisions that affect millions of our lives. It's almost like giving a kid a chainsaw and saying, hey, handle this responsibility. You're asking for a tragedy. It's just a matter of when. And isn't that the problem with the world today? Absurdity gets rewarded like it's a gold medal. Loud, confident nonsense becomes policy, and the rest of us are left trying to figure out if we're living in a country or a long-running sketch comedy show where the punchlines are actually terrifying. And I know I'm not the only one who feels that way. But again, that's why we're here. We're not just nodding along politely while a circus is marching on. No, we're questioning the unquestionable, which is incredibly important because laughing at power when it pretends to be wise is a way to point out their fallacy. And if you leave tonight thinking, wait, did I just get punked by my own leaders again? Congratulations, you're awake. That is step number one. And don't let them reframe you as being woke and that being a bad thing, because the opposite of woke is asleep, therefore ignorant and blind. I don't know about you, but I prefer awake, intelligent, and seeing. So anyways, so let's strap in because tonight we're gonna shine a little bit of light on hypocrisy, poke a little bit at the absurd, and explore why thinking for yourself is becoming one of the most radical acts that you can commit to. We're gonna talk about the people who swear that they've got it all figured out while secretly hoping nobody notices the chaos behind the curtain. Cue in the Epstein list, my friends. Again, all allegations are allegedly at this point, but we can allegedly assume that a lot of the address book that Mr. Epstein had, well, keeps addresses and network connections for no reason at all. I wonder. But, that being said, socks with sandals in the Supreme Court? Check. Promising a plan that evaporates on contact with reality? Triple check. Claiming expertise after you've read a Wikipedia article or perhaps maybe plugged in something to ChatGPT? Here's us looking at you. This is the Mind of Sai Marie, where we laugh, we think, we rant, and occasionally we cry, laughing at the audacity of humanity's stupidity. Stay tuned because the world is not going to slow down, and tonight we get front row seats and a megaphone to talking about the insanity that is happening around us. Now, I'm also going to offset this by talking about what I intended to originally talk about tonight, which is the silent grief of outgrowing people that you love. And I am going to talk about that distance and separation in the family. So I think that we should probably go there, and then I'll come back to this audaciousness, which basically is me ranting about the unofficial martial law with checkpoints that has now found itself active and occurring in our nation's capital at the moment. So, first of all, some of the things that you have to think about when you are looking at rebuilding your life and having to cut off anyone you care about. Actually, this happened to me tonight, and I had an experience that, it really hit me hard. And though the person that I had it with was someone that I actually liked, I found the way that they responded to the situation to be incredibly out of alignment with what I'm trying to build. Just putting that out there. If someone finds themselves cut off by me, everybody needs to know that's not always personal, nor is it supposed to be punishment, but I know that other people might perceive it that way. Sometimes it simply means that our paths no longer align. And I wish you well in your corner of the world, but your journey has diverged from the one that I am on. And I cannot allow toxic or hurtful energy in my space while I am striving to cultivate a life of joy, healing, and abundance. I do not want to see things that bring me back to places of pain and sorrow. So, if that is a situation, I always hope that whatever people learn from me during the time we share will grow into a beautiful plant that shields and guides them, because that is the gift that I had to give. But when I realize that the alignment's no longer there, I have to close the chapter for my own safety, because obviously, if I feel the need to cut you off, it's because you're doing something or you're behaving in a way that I don't feel that I can be around, and I can't change people. And if I make a statement and then someone gaslights me or kind of dismisses what I said and, totally negates everything that I have to say, that brings me directly back to the narcissistic family dynamics that I dealt with and worked so hard to break free from, and making myself smaller to fit into a space where people would say something that was cruel, and then I would explain why I felt that way, and then they would just say something like, the audacity of saying something like, well, sorry, not sorry. There's no room for having a relationship or connection with people like that. It's kind of like when someone says, I love you, but the context totally changes. I love you, but means that there is a condition or there is a situation that though the person cares about you and they love you, they cannot tolerate. And when someone says, I love you, but this has to end, and you don't end that thing, they are basically letting you know that in there, I love you, but this isn't going to work out and I need to go my own way. And it does not always mean it's a judgment. And this is really important because this is something that I had to directly do. And it's really, like I said, it's starting out with this quiet rebuild of framing what you want to do for yourself. And then realize that it's distance without malice, because it's choosing peace over being proximity to things that no longer serve you or cause you to feel lesser than or uncomfortable or diminished in some way. And if people want to be like that, then, you know, it's not a space you need to be enveloping yourself in. So even if those people come back and they try to apologize, or maybe they notice that you cut them off and now they're like, oh no, I'm losing this connection. That's exactly what a narcissistic abusive boyfriend does whenever they get cut off because they've been doing something that a person has shown them that is not okay and has hurt them, and then say something as smart alecky as, well, sorry, not sorry. That is a very immature thing to say, and it shows a lack of conscious awareness of how just because something affects you negatively doesn't mean that you should go about saying things around other people who are your friends that are triggering. But at the same time, see, notice the accountability there. You cannot control what other people do, and it is not their responsibility to be constantly thinking of what your trigger points are. So if you notice that and then you try to engage in something and somebody says something that's gaslighting or diminishing, or it's respecting them to know that that's their space and they have the right to say whatever they want, but you don't have to be around it. So if they are doing things that trigger you, whether or not they have the right to say them or not is not the question. The question is, how is it affecting you? And when you see something and it causes you to go into a dark space and feel sorrow and pain, even if that person wants to be your friend, you don't owe them that access. And that does not make you a bad person or a hateful person or somehow, trying to be wrong. So growing up in a large family that was rather narcissistic and dysfunctional, there were moments of extreme emotional overwhelm, toxicity, and trauma. My father was an alcoholic and he passed away from it. There are so many different things that go into watching a person kill themselves with alcoholism and how that can affect you. And not just that, how you can be the person that's on the receiving end of verbal abuse and then being really ornery, mean, and callous. And let me tell you, my dad was one of the worst. But then whenever they're not drinking, be a totally different person. And that's part of the reason why alcoholism is such a painful disease, because it, like most addictions, causes the addict to behave in erratic and verbally and in some cases physically violent ways. And it's not an excuse for the behavior. And yes, they're wrong for doing it. And yes, that is wrong. But when we go around and we express to other people that we want all these horrible things to happen, sometimes we forget that there are innocent people that are privy to that, that still have to deal with all of the consequences of these very nuanced experiences. And so if someone feels a certain way and they're behaving like in a way that you don't feel safe around, it's absolutely okay to cut them off. That decision to step away isn't done because of hate, but with hope. And it's very complex because while you're doing that and you don't want to be hateful to the person, you also don't want to compromise what you're building for yourself and allow them access to sit at your table because they are not on the same path as you. They are not at the same emotional and mental level that you are, and so they're out of alignment. And I don't like to do that with no one, not friends, not family, not connections. It's just, I have spent too many time in my youth being a people pleaser, diluting who I was and being inauthentic because I felt like I had to be that way in order to be loved and accepted, that I was never understood. I still feel like I'm never understood, but at this point I don't care because I worked on myself. And I understood that the distance that I needed to do for psychological and emotional reasons wasn't because I wanted to be vindictive. It wasn't because I wanted to be mean or get back at them. It was because I realized after countless times of trying to find resolution to be accepted and loved as who I was, who was doing the best that I could to be myself and get through a lot of unresolved trauma without the proper supports while being simultaneously kicked in the teeth while doing that, is why I finally realized that in some cases it doesn't matter. In some cases there honestly is no resolution. And that is why some divorces end with citing irreconcilable differences, right? So that is basically the thing that we're saying here. We're talking about a divorcing from your family because who you are and the way that you feel while you're being around them causes you so much inner turmoil, like in my case that I had suicidal ideation. And I don't want to be that way. I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be that version of myself. And I can't make anyone else change in order to meet me halfway if they don't want to. And 90% of the time, people don't want to take accountability for what they do wrong. They will say something like, sorry, not sorry. It's not contrite. They don't actually have any authenticity to it. And so it feels like there's actually never any closure. And since there is no closure, there's just this constant reopening of a wound. And I am not willing to do that. And though it can feel, really hard not to have that kind of support, during birthdays or Christmas and all those times when you would expect to have family. The way that people have framed loneliness is kind of tragic because the reality is if we reclaim it as being okay in our solitude and understanding that I had an epiphany, a solitary epiphany, if you will. I could love myself and build myself and do all the things for myself that none of those relatives that I was seeking validation from could do. And so now I have totally, completely transformed my way of thinking to understanding that I'm not alone. I'm just simply cultivating a specific type of space and energy. And if there are things around me that do not resonate with that mission, I need to take them away from the mission. I need to unpack things that only burden me with more problems because I already have enough problems on my plate and I cannot burden and shoulder everyone else's. So that said, there are a couple of healing sources that I think would be really good to share. Therapy and support groups like Better Health, the Open Path Collective, and of course, you can always look for local trauma and recovery groups. A couple of good books are Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents by Lindsay Gibson, Set Boundaries, Find Peace by Nedra Glover Tawwab, The Body Keeps Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Podcasts and communities you might want to check out are Therapy Chat, Motherhood Sessions, and the Trauma Tapes. And I want to pose this to you guys as a couple of journal prompts. First, ask yourself, what does peace look like for me? And then, what am I afraid will happen if I finally choose myself? Ponder on that and write it down. And if you feel like you want to share it, you guys can go ahead and post something to share it, tag me in it, and I would love to see that. If not, just use it as your own reflecting tool and consider the steps that you can take in order to realize what your highest self is calling you to do. So really work on looking for ways that you can rebuild and reframe things so that you can take back your autonomy and find the strength and the power of solitude and creating your own chosen family. Then go down and reparent your inner child. Because now that you're an adult, you can get those tools, you can learn about them, and then you can go and I've literally done this, look in the mirror and go, you know what? The little girl that went through all that never has to go through that ever again, because I am you now. You are me. And I am here to protect you when no one else was. So you tell yourself that, your inner child, that you grew up to be the person that would protect them when no one else ever did. And you will be surprised and astonished by how much that can literally change the course of your life. I also invite my listeners to reflect on finding affirmations for you, and that looks different to everyone. Find what affirms who you are. Learn about yourself. As cliche as it is, know thyself is some of the wisest advice, because the more you learn about who you are and you define yourself without allowing people to take that away from you, that's how you build and create yourself into being who you always wanted to be. And the rest of the world is always going to try to challenge that and disrupt you and take away your focus from what matters. Try to make you convinced that being alone is a bad thing. Try to make you convinced that being in your own energy is boring. Come on, get creative. What can you build on your own? Pick up a crochet needle. Let's see what you can make. Can you make a blanket out of string? So, in reflection on that, I just want to reiterate that distance does not mean hate. It often does mean healing. And I encourage you guys to honor your journey. Do what you need to do to journal and ask yourself the proper questions, and then find the way not just to allow it to end with asking those questions, but a way to resolve them. Find what the answers for you look like, because only you can determine what that is. And that is the distance of separation and family lesson that I wanted to talk about tonight. But on the long and short of things, we have a true 5-alarm fire out here when it comes down to the government at large, as it is. And yesterday we had all of these situations occur with the president essentially declaring unofficially, remember this is unofficially, it's not like something declared, but he put boots on the ground in Washington, D.C. in a rather similar format. This is how it appears. Again, this is just my opinion, but it certainly looks very much like martial law in practice. They literally have a curfew for young people, and they called them young thugs, which is pretty coded in and of itself. Keep that in mind. And they also put out this, there are all these little, traffic stops. There are checkpoints in Washington, D.C. And it took me a minute to even think of the word, because it's so unbelievable. I just cannot believe that there are checkpoints in Washington, D.C. right now. And yet, that is exactly what's been occurring. So it's kind of eye-opening to me how quickly things have escalated. And that is definitely why I have been in my I told you so era. But that's my little spiel for the night. And I will talk to you guys again soon. Hope you guys have a lovely Thursday night. And stay tuned till next time on the Mind of Sai Marie.